In February 1796, French officials dragged their own printing presses onto a Paris square, smashed them with hammers, and burned them in front of a crowd. Between April 1792 and August 1795, France spent around 4.5 billion livres. More than 3,700 million of that was raised, in the words of the economists who traced it, through money creation. Over 80% of a war paid for at the printing press. This is the story of the assignat. The paper that was never supposed to be money, the vote that made it money anyway, and a currency that ended up backed by the estates of the people the state executed. Stay with me. The debt that ate a kingdom. By 1788, the French crown could no longer pay for itself. Debt service was eating the budget, and in August, the Treasury suspended part of its payments. Jacques Necker, the king's finance minister, tried to borrow his way out. He opened 2 loans, 30 million livres at 4.5%, then 80 million at 5%. On the 24th of September 1789, Necker told the National Assembly what the arithmetic meant. New loans, he said, can only increase the current deficit. The state had run out of lenders. And then the Assembly did something the historian Rebecca Spang finds almost unbelievable. Barely aware of the scale of the problem, it doubled the debt, committing to buy back the venal offices, the posts men had purchased from the crown. That single promise added over 1.3 billion livres to what France owed. Land into paper. The way out came from a bishop. On the 10th of October 1789, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, Bishop of Autun, proposed that the property of the church be placed at the disposal of the nation. On the 2nd of November, the Assembly voted for it, 568 to 346. Overnight, the state owned roughly 3 billion livres of land, monasteries, farms, vineyards, and townhouses across France. By one estimate, it was worth about as much as the entire national debt. There was only one problem: you cannot pay soldiers in cathedrals. So, in December 1789, the Assembly invented a bridge, 400 million livres of paper, secured on that land, paying 5% interest, with a space on the back for a signature. It was not a banknote. It was a bond you could hand to someone else. The government called it an assignat. The design was almost elegant. You bought confiscated land at auction and paid in assignats. The state then canceled the paper you handed over and sent it to Paris to be burned. Every sale was meant to shrink the currency. France would be printing money and destroying it in the same motion. The vote that made it money. It did not stay a bond for long. In April 1790, the assignat was made legal tender, and the interest was cut to 3%. In September, another 800 million were authorized. In October, the interest was abolished altogether. A debt instrument had become, quietly, a currency. Here is the part almost everyone gets wrong. This was not the work of radicals. Spang counted the Assembly's Finance Committee, 19 titled noblemen, 3 archbishops, and 9 senior military officers. In her words, they tried very hard not to do anything revolutionary. When the assignats were first created, she writes, they definitely were not money. And the vote that made them money was not a landslide. It passed 495 to 424, in a chamber of roughly 1,200 deputies. By law, Spang writes, the assignats were money, yet fewer than half of France's national lawmakers had voted to make them so. Then, the denominations began to fall. 5 livres in 1791, 10 sous in 1793. Small change, the kind you spend on bread. The paper had left the auction house and gone into everybody's pocket. Backed by the guillotine. In April 1792, France went to war, and the real deficit rose roughly tenfold. The land behind the currency was no longer enough, so the state found more. In September, it confiscated the estates of the emigrants who had fled. In 1793, it annexed Nice, Savoy, and Belgium, and the terror supplied the rest, the property of the condemned. A Genevan critic of the revolution, François Duvernois, put it in one sentence in 1795. Each assignat issued, he wrote, was then nothing but a sort of bill of exchange drawn on the revolutionary tribunal and paid by the guillotine. Which brings us to the fact that breaks the simple story. The assignat did not only fall. In August and September 1792, after the emigrant estates were seized, it rose by 18%. It rose again in the second half of 1793 after the annexations. More paper was being printed, and the paper got stronger because the land behind it had grown. The coercion came anyway. In April 1793, contracts had to be written in assignats, and trading in coin was banned. From September 1793, refusing an assignat could send you to the guillotine, but only if the prosecution proved you did it to help the enemy. The ordinary penalty was a fine, or 6 years in irons. The courts sometimes invented the intent. And here's the detail nobody expects. The death penalty for forging assignats was not a creation of the terror. It was decreed in November 1790 and sanctioned by Louis XVI. The king signed the death sentence for counterfeiting the paper that was secured, in part, on his own crown lands. 2 years later they executed him. The bonfire. After Robespierre fell, the price controls went with him, and the floor gave way. In February 1795, taxes covered 12% of what the state spent. In March, 9.9%. In April, 6.4%. Almost everything else came off the press. Issuance went from 700 million a month to 3 billion to 5 billion under the Directory. From May to December 1795, France crossed the line economists use to define hyperinflation. And in December, the legislature did something that tells you everything. It voted a hard ceiling, 40 billion livres, and not one more. Printed, though, is not the same as circulating. Assignats were burned as the confiscated land was sold, and France cannot settle the argument today because its financial archives burned in 1871. The usual explanation is that they printed too much. Rebecca Spang argues the causation ran the other way, that the great price rises began before most of the assignats had been issued. Economists have pushed back hard on that, and the argument is not settled. What is better established is the timing. During the terror, when the presses ran hardest, prices were held down. The hyperinflation arrived after Robespierre was executed. And a 2023 study traced the two collapses in demand for the currency to politics rather than volume. A failed insurrection in June 1795, and the founding of the Directory that November. When people stopped believing the state could deliver the land, the paper died. On the 19th of February 1796, on the square then called the Place des Piques, today the Place Vendôme, the presses, plates, and stamps were broken and burned in public. The official record calls it the burning, melting, and breaking of all the objects that had served in the making of assignats. At the end, an assignat was worth roughly 1/300th of its face value. The replacement lasted a month. The mandat territorial, issued in March 1796, exchanged at 30 assignats to 1 and came with a direct claim on land. Within a month, it was trading at about a fifth of face value. By early 1797, it too had lost legal tender status. The paper died. The land did not go back. In 1801, the Pope himself renounced the claim, agreeing that the buyers of church property would never be disturbed. In 1814, the restored monarchy wrote the sales into its own constitution, stating that all property is inviolable, with no exception for the property called national. And in 1825, the king paid the aristocrats cash instead, 630 million francs in compensation, rather than take the land back. Among those paid was Talleyrand, the bishop who had proposed seizing it all in the first place. The assignat failed completely as money. As an instrument for moving a country's property from one set of hands to another, permanently, it worked.